What would you do if your family sued you for $15 million after spending your entire life treating you like you didn't exist? That's exactly what happened to me when they found out I was worth more than all of them combined. But here's the twist they never saw coming. I had evidence that would destroy them in court, and it came from the one person they thought was on their side. My name is Maya Thompson. I'm 36 years old, and I run a fintech company worth $47 million. But none of that mattered to my family until they decided to sue me for it. This story starts way before the money, way before the success. Back when I was just a 10-year-old kid, trying to figure out why my little sister got ponies for her birthday, while I got a grocery store cake that my mom forgot to pick up until the day after. I grew up in a modest suburb outside San Antonio called Cedar Ridge. You know, the type of neighborhood cookie-cutter houses built in the 90s, each one painted a slightly different shade of beige with small front yards and driveways just wide enough for two cars if you squeeze them in perfectly. Our house was a three-bedroom ranch style with brown brick and white trim that was always peeling. We had this chain-link fence around the backyard that Dad was constantly promising to replace with something nicer, and a golden retriever named Buster who had more personality than half the humans in our family, but never listened to a single command anyone gave him. Mom worked as a loan officer at First National Bank, the kind of job where she wore pantsuits from J.C. Penney, and came home every evening complaining about difficult customers and unrealistic quotas. Dad sold life insurance for State Farm, which meant he spent most of his time trying to convince people to think about their own mortality while driving around in a 10-year-old Honda Civic with a dented bumper and a world's greatest dad coffee mug permanently stuck in the cup holder. We weren't poor, but we weren't rich either. We were aggressively middle class, the kind of family that shopped at Target instead of Walmart, but still clipped coupons and waited for sales to buy anything that wasn't absolutely essential. My sister Lena is 6 years younger than me, which meant that by the time she was old enough to have opinions about things, I was already in middle school and supposedly mature enough to understand why she needed more attention. At least, that's how my parents explained it when I asked why she got new clothes while I wore hand-me-downs from our cousin Jennifer. From the moment Lena could walk, it was like she had this invisible spotlight following her everywhere she went. And I'm not exaggerating when I say she got everything. I mean everything. When Lena turned 10, my parents threw her this massive birthday party that's still talked about in our neighborhood 15 years later. They rented actual Shetland ponies from some farm outside the city, hired a professional clown named Giggles, who did magic tricks and made balloon animals, and ordered one of those elaborate princess cakes from the fancy bakery downtown that cost more than our weekly grocery budget. The entire backyard was transformed. There were pink and purple streamers hanging from every tree branch, a giant bounce house shaped like a castle face, painting stations, and enough balloons to lift our house off its foundation. Mom had even rented those little round tables with white tablecloths and hired a photographer to document every moment. The whole neighborhood showed up. Kids I'd never seen before were running around our yard. Parents were standing around drinking lemonade and talking about how wonderful the party was. And Lena was in the center of it all, wearing this elaborate purple dress that looked like something a Disney princess would wear, complete with a plastic tiara that caught the sunlight every time she moved her head. I remember standing at my bedroom window watching all of this unfold and feeling like I was looking at someone else's life. This couldn't be my family. The same family that had to check the bank balance before buying groceries, spending hundreds of dollars on one day for one child. My 10th birthday, which had happened just 3 months earlier, was a very different affair. I got a hand-me-down bicycle from our neighbor Mrs. Peterson, whose daughter had outgrown it. The bike was purple, which I actually loved, but it had Barbie stickers all over it that were peeling off and couldn't be removed completely, leaving behind these sticky residue marks that collected dirt. The cake came from the day-old section at H-E-B, one of those generic sheet cakes with white frosting and happy birthday, written in blue icing by someone who clearly wasn't getting paid enough to care about penmanship. Mom had forgotten to buy it until the day after my actual birthday. So we had this weird belated celebration where everyone pretended it was normal to sing happy birthday 24 hours late. The candles didn't even fit right because the cake was too small, so some of them were stuck in at weird angles. And when I blew them out, wax dripped onto the frosting. I remember thinking that this was probably what disappointment tasted like. But here's the thing that really got to me, the thing that kept me awake at night for years afterward. It wasn't just the birthdays. It was everything. Every single thing. In 5th grade, I won the district spelling bee. I had studied for months, practicing every single night after dinner, with a list of words I'd copied from the dictionary. I made flashcards, I asked Dad to quiz me while he watched TV. I even practiced in front of my bedroom mirror so I'd be ready for the stage. The competition was held at Roosevelt Elementary on a Saturday morning in March. There were 43 kids from schools all over the district, and I was nervous enough to throw up in the parking lot before we even went inside. The auditorium was packed with parents and siblings all cheering for their kids. Round by round, kids got eliminated. Necessary. Pronunciation. Achievement. Definitely. Words that seemed impossible became manageable when you'd studied them for months. When it came down to just me and this kid named Marcus from the north side, I could feel my heart pounding so hard I was sure the microphone would pick it up. The final word was onomatopoeia. I'd practiced that one 100 times. onomatopoeia. When the judge said I was correct when they called my name as the district winner, I looked out into that auditorium searching for my parents' faces. They weren't there. Dad had a golf game with his college buddies, something that had been planned for weeks and couldn't be rescheduled. Mom was getting Lena's hair done for some modeling photos that a family friend had offered to take for free. They both said they were proud of me when I told them I'd won, but in that absent, distracted way, people say they're proud when they're not really listening. The trophy sat on my dresser for exactly 2 days before Mom moved it to make room for Lena's participation ribbon from a dance recital. 2 years later, Lena joined the middle school cheerleading squad. Not even varsity, just regular middle school cheer where half the girls couldn't do a cartwheel and the uniforms were hand-me-downs from the high school team. My entire family showed up to every single practice, every game, every car wash fundraiser, every bake sale. They bought special shirts with her name and number on them. Dad learned all the cheers so he could shout them from the stands. Mom became the unofficial team photographer, taking hundreds of pictures at every event. When Lena made junior varsity the next year, you would have thought she'd been drafted by the Dallas Cowboys. There was a celebration dinner at Olive Garden, a congratulations cake, phone calls to relatives, Facebook posts with crying, laughing emojis about how proud they were. I started to think maybe there was something fundamentally wrong with me. Maybe I wasn't trying hard enough. Maybe I wasn't lovable enough. Maybe I just didn't matter the way other people did. Maybe some kids were born to be the main character in their family's story, and some kids were born to be background extras. That's when my Uncle David came into the picture and changed everything. Uncle David was my mom's younger brother, 7 years her junior, and about as different from her as a person could be. Where Mom was practical and rule-following and obsessed with what the neighbors thought Uncle David was. This free-spirited artist who lived in a converted warehouse in downtown San Antonio and painted these huge abstract pieces that nobody really understood, including him, probably. He had long hair that he kept in a ponytail, wore vintage band t-shirts and paint-stained jeans, and drove this ancient Volkswagen van that was covered in bumper stickers from places he'd traveled. He was the kind of adult that other adults whispered about at family gatherings, the one who never settled down and needed to get it serious about life. But he had this way of seeing things that other people missed, this ability to notice the stuff that everyone else overlooked. He started showing up to family dinners more often sometime around my 11th birthday. While everyone else was fawning over whatever achievement or activity Lena was involved in that week, Uncle David would always sit next to me at the dinner table and ask me real questions about real things. "What are you reading these days, Maya?" he'd ask while Mom was showing off Lena's latest report card to Dad. "What do you think about that new computer lab they put in at your school?" He'd wonder while Lena demonstrated her newest cheerleading routine in the living room. "Have you ever thought about what you want to do when you grow up?" he'd ask while my parents discussed Lena's potential modeling career. Uncle David was the only adult in my life who seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts, my opinions, my dreams. He treated me like I was a real person with real ideas, not just the older sister whose job was to be responsible and understanding and invisible. One evening in December, we were having one of our usual family dinners. Lena had just made the honor roll for the first time, which was being treated like she'd won a Nobel Prize, even though I'd been on the honor roll every semester since third grade. There was a special cake phone calls to grandparents and plans for a celebration dinner that weekend. I excused myself from the table and went to hide in my room, which had become my standard response to these family celebrations that didn't include me. I was reading this old book I'd found at a garage sale the weekend before some mystery novel from the 1980s that cost 50 cents and had that musty smell of old paper. I was about halfway through chapter 7 when something fell out from between the pages. It was a folded piece of paper yellowed around the edges, and written in Uncle David's messy handwriting were 7 words that would stick with me for the rest of my life. Some lights only shine when no one's watching. I stared at that note for probably 10 minutes, turning it over in my hands, wondering how it had gotten into a random book from a garage sale, wondering if Uncle David had somehow known I would find it. The handwriting was definitely his, that distinctive scrawl that looked like it was written by someone in a hurry to get their thoughts down before they disappeared. I had no idea what he meant back then. But somehow, holding that note in my 11-year-old hands, sitting alone in my room while my family celebrated my sister's mediocre achievement downstairs, I felt like someone finally saw me. Really saw me. Not the good grades or the spelling bee victories or the perfect behavior. Not the things I accomplished or the ways I tried to earn attention. Just me. The real me, the one who existed, even when no one was watching, even when no one was keeping score. Little did I know that this was just the beginning of a story that would tear my family apart and force me to choose between the approval I'd always craved and the freedom I never knew I needed. But sometimes the most important journeys start with the smallest moments. Sometimes freedom begins with a 7-word note hidden in a 50-cent book written by the one person who bothered to notice that you existed. After finding that note from Uncle David, something fundamental shifted inside me. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, nothing you'd see in a movie montage. It was quieter than that, more like finally exhaling after holding your breath for years without realizing it. I stopped waiting for my parents to notice me and started focusing on the one thing I could actually control: my future. I threw myself into school like my life depended on it, and honestly, it felt like it did. I maintained a perfect GPA all through high school, not because I was naturally brilliant, but because I studied harder than everyone else. While other kids were complaining about homework, I was treating every assignment like it was the most important thing I'd ever do. I joined the math club, even though it was considered social suicide and meant spending Friday afternoons in Mr. Peterson's classroom solving equations, while everyone else was hanging out at the mall. I didn't care. The math club was where I met other kids who actually cared about learning, who didn't think trying hard was something to be embarrassed about. Most importantly, I spent every free afternoon at the public library on Guadalupe Street, sitting at one of those ancient desktop computers that took 5 minutes to boot up, teaching myself how to code from YouTube tutorials and free online courses. The library was this beautiful old building with high ceilings and tall windows that let in golden afternoon light. It smelled like old books and floor polish, and there was this comforting quiet that you could only find in places where people went to learn things rather than just kill time. Mrs. Rodriguez was the head librarian, this tiny woman in her 60s who wore cardigans year-round and had this amazing ability to find exactly the right book for anyone who asked. She noticed me there every day. After school, hunched over the computer in the back corner, wearing headphones that were falling apart and taking notes in a composition notebook I'd bought for $1 at the beginning of the school year. "What are you working on, mija?" she asked me one afternoon in my junior year. "Learning Python." I told her, showing her the screen where I was following along with a tutorial about building a simple calculator. She looked at the code I'd written, even though I was pretty sure she had no idea what any of it meant. You know, my daughter Sophia is a software engineer in Dallas. She started just like this, teaching herself, programming in her spare time. Now she makes more money than her father and I ever dreamed of. Mrs. Rodriguez started letting me stay past closing time, saying I reminded her of Sophia when she was my age. She'd bring me coffee from the break room and check on my progress, celebrating with me when I finally got a program to run without errors. Education is the one thing nobody can take away from you, she told me one evening as I was packing up my notebook. No matter what happens in your life, what you put in your brain stays there. Senior year, all that work finally paid off. I applied to 12 universities and got accepted to 8 of them. Rice University offered me a partial scholarship, not a full ride, but enough to make college possible, if I was willing to work my butt off and live like a monk for 4 years. When I told my parents about Rice, we were sitting around the dinner table on a Thursday night in March. I'd been waiting all day to share the news, rehearsing in my head how I'd tell them, imagining their proud reactions. I got into Rice, I announced, putting the acceptance letter on the table next to the meatloaf Mom had made. With a partial scholarship, it's enough to cover most of the tuition if I work part-time and live in the cheapest dorm. Mom looked up from cutting Lena's meat, glanced at the letter for about 2 seconds, and said, "That's nice, honey. Rice is a good school. Very expensive, though." Then she immediately turned to Lena. "Did you tell Maya about your modeling contract?" Lena, who was 14, and had done exactly 3 photo shoots for a local clothing boutique called Trendy Threads, launched into this elaborate story about how the photographer had told her she had real potential and might be able to get work in Dallas or even Austin if she kept developing her portfolio. "He says I have the bone structure for high fashion," Lena said, pouting her lips the way she'd been practicing in the mirror. "And my Instagram followers have gone up by like 50 people since the last shoot." Dad put down his fork and gave Lena his full attention. "That's incredible, sweetheart. We're so proud of you for pursuing your dreams." I sat there holding my Rice acceptance letter, watching my parents get more excited about Lena's theoretical modeling career than they were about my actual academic achievement. It was like being invisible while sitting right in front of them. That night, I called Uncle David from the phone in the kitchen after everyone had gone to bed. "Rice!" He practically shouted into the phone. "Maya, that's incredible! That's one of the best universities in the country! I'm so damn proud of you, I could burst." He talked to me for an hour about college, about what I was planning to study, about how excited he was for me to experience life beyond Cedar Ridge and our family's narrow worldview. "You're going to meet people who think like you do," he said. "People who value intelligence and hard work and creativity. It's going to change your whole perspective on what's possible." College was the first time in my life I felt like I could actually breathe. I moved into Hanson College, one of Rice's residential colleges, in August. My dorm room was tiny, maybe 10 feet by 12 feet, with cinder block walls painted institutional white and a window that looked out onto the parking lot. I had a roommate named Jennifer who was from Houston and whose parents had gone to Rice, and whose grandfather had donated money for a library wing. We had nothing in common except our major, but she was kind in that polite way that well-raised Southern girls are taught to be kind, and she didn't judge me for shopping at thrift stores or eating ramen noodles for dinner 3 nights a week. I worked 25 hours a week at the campus bookstore, which meant I knew where every single textbook was located and could help stressed-out students find obscure reference materials for their senior theses. The pay was minimum wage, but it came with a small employee discount and flexible hours that worked around my class schedule. My daily routine was simple classes from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., work at the bookstore from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m., then studying until midnight or 1 a.m., depending on how much homework I had. Weekends were for laundry, grocery shopping at the discount store off campus, and catching up on readings I hadn't finished during the week. I lived on ramen noodles, peanut butter sandwiches, and determination. I bought my textbooks used when possible, and photocopied chapters from library copies when buying wasn't an option. I learned to stretch a dollar further than I ever thought possible. And surprisingly, I was happier than I'd ever been. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who valued the same things I did. In my computer science classes, being smart wasn't something to hide. Working hard wasn't seen as try-hard behavior. Having big goals wasn't considered unrealistic. Uncle David was the only family member who seemed genuinely proud of me and interested in my college experience. Every Sunday afternoon, he'd video call me from his warehouse studio, sitting in front of his latest painting with his hair tied back and paint under his fingernails. "Tell me about your classes," he'd say, genuinely wanting to know about algorithm design and data structures and user interface development. "What are you learning that's blowing your mind this week?" he'd ask, then listen intently while I explained some concept that had finally clicked for me. "How are you feeling? Are you taking care of yourself? Are you happy?" He'd wonder because he was the only adult who seemed to care about my emotional well-being as much as my academic performance. During my sophomore year, he even drove up to Houston to take me out for a real dinner. Not campus food or ramen, but an actual meal at this little Mexican restaurant near campus that had the best queso I'd ever tasted. "You're building something real here, Maya." He told me over tacos and queso and beer that I was technically too young to drink, but the server didn't card me for. "You're becoming the person you were always meant to be, the person you would have been all along if they'd just given you the space to grow." He paused and looked at me seriously. "Don't let anyone convince you that what you're doing doesn't matter. Don't let anyone make you feel like your dreams are too big or too ambitious or too much trouble. What you're doing here, this education, this independence, this growth, it matters more than any of them will ever understand." Meanwhile, back home in Cedar Ridge, the golden child was struggling in ways that nobody wanted to acknowledge. Lena had enrolled at San Antonio Community College after graduating high school, planning to get her basics done before transferring to a four-year university. At least, that was the official plan. In reality, she lasted exactly one semester before dropping out because college was interfering with her modeling career. She'd started an Instagram account called Lena Modeling Say and was posting photos of herself in different outfits, hoping that brands would notice her and offer her sponsorship deals. She had about 300 followers, most of whom were high school classmates and family members. But she talked about her social media presence like she was running a Fortune 500 company. The modeling career consisted of unpaid photo shoots with amateur photographers who found her through Instagram, usually for experience and portfolio building. These photographers would promise to submit her photos to agencies or magazines, but somehow those submissions never materialized into actual paying work. Instead of acknowledging that the modeling thing wasn't working out, instead of encouraging Lena to develop some practical skills or go back to school, my parents doubled down on enabling her fantasy. Every time Lena ran out of money, every time she couldn't make her car payment, or needed rent for whatever apartment she was sharing with 3 other girls that month, guess who came to the rescue? Mom and Dad, writing check after check, enabling her to avoid any real responsibility or consequences for her choices. "She's pursuing her dreams," Mom would say when Dad worried about their savings account. "We can't put a price on supporting our daughter's artistic ambitions." Meanwhile, I was graduating summa cum laude with a degree in computer science and a minor in business administration. I'd maintained a 3.97 GPA while working part-time, completed 2 internships, and had a job offer waiting for me at a software development company in Austin. My parents didn't come to my graduation ceremony. It conflicted with some big opportunity that Lena had, which turned out to be a meeting with someone who claimed to be a talent scout but was actually recruiting people for a pyramid scheme selling weight loss supplements called Beachbody Breakthrough. "We're so proud of you, honey," Mom said when I called to tell them I'd graduated. "We'll celebrate when you get home." The celebration never happened. By the time I got back to Cedar Ridge, Lena was in crisis mode because the Beachbody Breakthrough thing had fallen through, and all of my parents' attention was focused on helping her figure out her next move. But life has a funny way of evening things out sometimes, of providing justice when you least expect it. 3 months after my graduation, while I was working my first real job and saving money for my own apartment, something happened that changed the entire dynamic of my family forever. My grandmother Rose passed away. Grandma Rose had always been different from the rest of the family. She was sharp and practical, and she saw things clearly without the emotional filters that everyone else seemed to use. She was the one who taught me to balance a checkbook when I was 12 years old, who showed me how to comparison shop and read the fine print on contracts. I was the only grandchild who ever helped her with her computer when it was acting up, who sat with her at the kitchen table while she paid bills and organized her paperwork. While Lena was getting her hair done or shopping for clothes, I was learning about compound interest and retirement planning and the importance of having an emergency fund. When the lawyer read Grandma Rose's will at the family meeting a week after the funeral, there was a shock that nobody saw coming, least of all me. Grandma had left me $20,000, not to the family to be split up, not to my parents to manage on my behalf, but specifically and legally to me. She'd structured it so that it was completely protected from anyone else's claims or interference. The letter she left with the inheritance explained everything in her clear, practical handwriting. Maya, it read, I've watched how your parents have treated you and Lena differently your entire life. I've seen how hard you work and how little recognition you get for it. I've watched you grow into a young woman with integrity and determination and intelligence, despite being overlooked and undervalued by the people who should have been your biggest supporters. The letter continued, This money isn't charity, and it isn't pity. It's an investment in someone I know will use it wisely and purposefully. You have something your sister doesn't have, and never will have the ability to build something meaningful from nothing. I want to give you something that's yours alone, something that can help you build the life you deserve, free from the expectations and limitations that others try to put on you. She signed it, Love and faith in your future, Grandma Rose. My mother lost her absolute mind. The family meeting the day after the lawyer's reading was held in my parents' living room, the same room where I'd spent countless family gatherings, being ignored while Lena was celebrated. Mom was pacing back and forth in front of the fireplace like a caged animal, her face red with anger and disbelief. This isn't fair, she kept saying over and over. This isn't fair to Lena. She's struggling right now and Maya's already doing fine with her college degree and her job. Why would Mom do this? Why would she punish Lena for pursuing her dreams? Dad was sitting in his recliner looking uncomfortable, but nodding along with everything Mom said. Lena was curled up on the couch, crying those pretty tears she'd perfected over the years, the kind that made her look vulnerable and sympathetic rather than blotchy and red. Lena should have gotten something too, Mom declared, turning to look at me like I was personally responsible for Grandma's decision. She's family. She deserves something. This is going to hurt her so much knowing that Grandma didn't think enough of her to leave her anything. I sat there on the edge of the couch holding the letter from Grandma Rose, looking at this woman who had raised me, but had never really seen me. This woman who was more upset about her younger daughter not getting money she'd never earned than she was proud of her older daughter being recognized for her character and work ethic. Finally, I said the words that would haunt our relationship forever. Lena did get something, Mom. She got your love. She got your attention. She got your support and your encouragement and your pride every single day for 22 years. She got new clothes while I wore hand-me-downs. She got birthday parties while I got forgotten cakes. She got your presence at every event that mattered to her while you missed every achievement that mattered to me. I stood up still holding Grandma's letter. This $20,000, it's the first thing that's ever been just mine. It's the first time anyone in this family has ever recognized my worth. And you want to take that away from me too and give it to the daughter who's already gotten everything. The silence in that room was deafening. You could hear the air conditioning cycling on the neighbor's dog barking 3 houses down, the sound of cars passing by on our street. But inside that living room, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Uncle David reached over from where he was sitting on the other end of the couch and squeezed my hand under the throw pillow. It was a small gesture, but it reminded me that I wasn't completely alone in this family, that at least one person understood what I was feeling. Dad finally broke the silence. Maya, we're not trying to take anything away from you. We just think Grandma might not have understood Lena's situation fully. Maybe if we talk to the lawyer. No, I said, quietly but firmly. Grandma understood perfectly. She understood better than any of you ever have. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my purse. I'm going back to Austin tomorrow. I'll be in touch when I'm ready. That inheritance wasn't just money. It was validation. It was proof that someone in my family had finally seen my worth, had finally recognized that I was more than just the responsible older daughter who could be counted on to understand and make sacrifices and never complain. It was about to become the foundation for something none of them could have ever imagined, something that would grow beyond their wildest dreams and eventually threaten them enough to make them show their true colors in ways I never could have predicted. But that night, driving back to Austin with Grandma Rose's letter in my purse and $20,000 about to change my life, all I felt was freedom. For the first time ever, I had something that was completely mine, something that came with no strings attached, no expectations, no conditions. I had a choice to make about what kind of life I wanted to build, and for the first time, I had the resources to build it exactly the way I wanted it to be. That $20,000 from Grandma Rose became my ticket to freedom. But let me tell you, building a business from scratch isn't some overnight success story you see in movies. It's messy, it's terrifying, and it almost broke me more times than I can count. I moved to Austin after graduation because the tech scene was exploding there and I could stretch my money further than in Silicon Valley. I rented this tiny studio apartment above a taco shop, and the smell of cumin and grease became the soundtrack to my life for the next 2 years. Every weekend, every evening after my day job at a local software company, I was coding. I had this idea for a fintech app called Penny Pinch that would help small businesses manage their cash flow and automate their bookkeeping. Nothing revolutionary, but I'd seen how much small business owners struggled with this stuff, and I thought I could make it simpler. I used $15,000 of Grandma's money to live on while I built the first version, keeping $5,000 as an emergency fund because she'd taught me to always have a backup plan. The first version of Penny Pinch was garbage. I'm not being modest here, it was genuinely terrible. The user interface looked like it was designed by a colorblind robot. It crashed constantly, and the few people who downloaded it deleted it within hours. My user base peaked at 43 people and then dropped to 12. 12. I remember the night I hit rock bottom. I was at this 24-hour laundromat at 2 in the morning, washing my clothes because I'd been too busy coding to do laundry for 3 weeks. I was sitting there surrounded by the smell of cheap detergent and industrial dryers, staring at my laptop screen, showing those pathetic user numbers. And I just broke down. I called Uncle David crying, probably waking him up, telling him I was a failure, and maybe I should just give up and get a normal job like everyone expected me to. He listened to me sob for 10 minutes, then said something I'll never forget. Maya, the difference between people who make it and people who don't isn't talent. It's how many times they're willing to get back up. And you kiddo, you've got more fight in you than anyone I know. The next morning, I applied to a tech incubator called Launchpad Austin. I didn't think I had a chance, but I figured I had nothing left to lose. That's where I met Diane Chen. Diane was a former tech executive who'd sold her company for $80 million and was now mentoring startups. She was in her 50s, sharp as a knife, and she didn't sugarcoat anything. When she looked at my app, she said, "This is trash. But you're not. Let's fix it." For the next 6 months, Diane tore apart everything I thought I knew about building a business. She taught me about user experience, market research, and most importantly, how to find customers who actually needed what I was building. Instead of trying to serve everyone, we focused on one specific market: cleaning companies. These businesses had tons of moving parts, employees working different shifts, supplies to track, and most of them were still using spreadsheets or paper to manage everything. I rebuilt Penny Pinch from the ground up. This time, I actually talked to cleaning company owners, spent time in their offices, watched how they worked. The new version wasn't pretty, but it solved real problems. My first B2B client was Rodriguez Cleaning Services, a family-owned company with 30 employees. When I showed them how Penny Pinch could automate their payroll and track their supply costs, the owner, Carlos, looked at me like I just handed him a winning lottery ticket. "This is going to save me 15 hours a week," he said. "How much?" I was so nervous I almost said it was free. But Diane had drilled into me that if you don't value your work, nobody else will either. $200 a month. I managed to get out. He signed up on the spot. Word spread through the cleaning industry faster than I expected. Carlos told his brother-in-law, who told his friend, who told her business partner. Within 6 months, I had 47 clients paying monthly subscriptions. That's when I knew I had something real. I quit my day job and moved into a small office space in downtown Austin. It was just one room with concrete floors and windows that didn't open properly, but it felt like a palace to me. I hired 2 young developers, fresh out of UT Marcus and Priya, who were hungry and brilliant and willing to work for equity. For the first time in my life, I was building something that was entirely mine with people who believed in the vision as much as I did. Meanwhile, back in San Antonio, the family drama was reaching new heights. Lena had gotten engaged to this guy Brian who worked in car sales and thought he was God's gift to humanity. You know, the type too much cologne, fake gold watch, called everyone buddy in that condescending way. My parents threw them a $40,000 engagement party. $40,000. That's twice what Grandma left me spent on one night of celebration for a relationship that anyone with half a brain could see wasn't going to last. I found out about the party from Uncle David because I wasn't invited. According to him, my mother said it was immediate family only, which apparently didn't include me anymore. But here's the thing that really stung. Uncle David also told me something else he'd overheard during a family dinner. My parents had quietly updated their will. Everything they owned, their house, their savings, Dad's life insurance policy, all of it was going to Lena and Brian. I wasn't just excluded from the engagement party. I'd been erased from their future entirely. As I sat in my little office that night, watching the Austin skyline through those stubborn windows, I realized something important. It didn't hurt the way it used to. I was building something they couldn't take away from me, something they couldn't diminish with their indifference. I was finally free from needing their approval, but I had no idea that my freedom would eventually threaten them enough to declare war. 3 years into building Penny Pinch, something incredible happened. Forbes magazine reached out to me for their Top 30 Under 40 Tech Founders feature. They wanted to interview me about building a business from scratch and disrupting the small business financial management space. The photo shoot was surreal. There I was, standing in my Austin office with its exposed brick walls and startup energy, talking to a reporter about my journey from rejected daughter to successful entrepreneur. When the article came out, they called me a rising star in fintech with an intuitive understanding of what small businesses really need. That Forbes article changed everything. Not just for my business, but for my family's sudden interest in my existence. My mom called me for the first time in 8 months. "Maya, honey, we saw the article. We're so proud of you." She said it like she'd been supporting me all along, like she hadn't spent years treating me like I was invisible. Dad started texting me business advice he'd found on Facebook. "Saw this article about tax strategies for entrepreneurs. Thought you might find it useful." Like I hadn't been successfully running a company for 3 years without his input. But the weirdest part was how they kept dropping hints about their financial situation. Mom would casually mention how expensive Lena's wedding was going to be, how they were stretched a little thin with all the family expenses. Dad started talking about retirement and how kids these days needed to remember where they came from. It was like watching people I'd known my whole life put on masks pretending to be loving parents who had always believed in me. I'd just closed a Series A funding round for $2.8 million and moved into this beautiful townhome in South Austin. It had huge windows, a modern kitchen, and for the first time in my life, I had enough space for all my books and a home office that didn't double as my bedroom. I decided to throw a housewarming party. I invited everyone on my team from work, my mentor Diane, some friends I'd made in the Austin tech scene. And yes, I invited my family too. I thought maybe this could be a fresh start, a chance for them to see what I'd built, and finally understand that I wasn't the failure they'd always treated me as. Uncle David was the only one who came. He drove down from San Antonio with a bottle of wine and this huge smile on his face. "Look at this place, Maya," he said, walking through my home. "Look at what you've built. Not just the house, not just the business, but this whole life. I'm so damn proud of you." We sat on my back patio that evening, drinking wine and watching the sunset, and for the first time I felt like maybe family wasn't about who you shared DNA with. Maybe it was about who showed up. But life has a cruel sense of timing. 2 weeks later, on my 29th birthday, I got a certified letter in the mail. The return address was from a law firm in San Antonio. My hands were shaking as I opened it, somehow knowing that whatever was inside was going to hurt. It was a formal notification that my parents had updated their will. Everything they owned, their house, their savings accounts, dad's life insurance policy, even mom's jewelry, all of it was going to Lena and Brian. But it wasn't just the legal language that cut me. It was the personal note attached. "Maya, you've been fortunate enough to build a successful career and don't need our support. Lena has more immediate needs and would benefit more from our legacy. We hope you understand." I read that note 5 times each time, hoping the words would somehow change. But they didn't. They'd put it in writing, made it official. I wasn't just the forgotten daughter anymore. I was the deliberately excluded one. The worst part, they'd sent it on my birthday. Whether that was intentional or just coincidence, I'll never know. But getting that letter on the day I turned 29 felt like they were telling me that my birth was something they regretted. I called in sick to work the next day, which I'd never done, and just lay in bed staring at the ceiling. All those years of trying to prove myself, all the achievements, all the success, none of it mattered. I was never going to be enough for them. I was never going to be Lena. Uncle David called that evening like he had a sixth sense about these things. "Hey kiddo, how was your birthday?" I told him about the letter, and the silence on the other end of the phone went on so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Finally he said, "Maya, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me. Sometimes success makes the wrong people resent you, and sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the least capable of celebrating who you've become." He paused, and I could hear him take a deep breath. "Your parents are small people living small lives, and your bigness scares them. They can handle Lena needing them, but they can't handle you not needing them. It threatens everything they believe about themselves." We talked for 2 hours that night. By the end of the call, I felt like I could breathe again. Uncle David was right. This wasn't about me not being good enough. This was about them not being big enough to handle my success. I thought I was finally okay with being written out of my family's story. I thought I'd found peace with it. Then, 3 months later, I was scrolling through Facebook during my lunch break when I saw a post from my high school friend Sarah. It was a photo from the hospital, her visiting my dad, who was lying in a bed with tubes and monitors all around him. "Praying for Mr. Thompson's quick recovery after his heart attack," the caption read. Such a sweet man. My dad had had a heart attack. He was in the hospital, and no one in my family had told me. I stared at that photo for 10 minutes, my sandwich forgotten, my heart pounding so hard, I thought I might be having my own cardiac event. This wasn't about wills or money or favoritism anymore. This was about being so completely erased from my family that they wouldn't even tell me when my father was fighting for his life. I grabbed my keys and headed for my car. It was time to go home and find out exactly how much of a stranger I'd become to the people who raised me. Dad survived the heart attack, but he never really recovered. 3 months later, he passed away in his sleep. I found out about his death the same way I'd found out about his hospitalization through Facebook. The funeral was on a Tuesday morning at the same church where I'd been baptized as a baby. I drove down from Austin wearing my only black dress, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I walked into that church and it was like entering a room full of strangers. People I'd known my whole life looked right through me. My own mother, standing at the front, greeting mourners, gave me the kind of polite nod you'd give to a distant acquaintance. Uncle David was the only one who hugged me. "I'm sorry I couldn't call you," he whispered. "They told everyone you were too busy with work to be bothered." Too busy with work to be bothered by my own father's death. After the service, I was standing alone by my car when Brian approached me. He'd put on weight since the engagement party and was wearing a suit that didn't quite fit right. But his arrogance was perfectly sized. "Maya," he said, crossing his arms, "I just want to make sure we're clear about something. Don't think you can contest Dad's will just because you've got money now. Everything's locked up tight, legally speaking." I stared at him for a moment. "Contest the will, Brian. I don't want anything from this family. I never have." He laughed this ugly sound that echoed off the church parking lot. "Right, sure you don't. That was the last conversation I thought I'd ever have with any of them." I was wrong. 3 weeks later, I was in my office going over Q3 financials when my assistant buzzed me. "Maya, you have visitors? Your mother's sister and brother-in-law are here. They don't have an appointment, but they say it's urgent family business." My stomach dropped. They'd never visited my office before. Hell, they'd never even acknowledged that my office existed. They walked in like they owned the place. Mom was wearing her church dress. Lena had on designer clothes I was pretty sure she couldn't afford. And Brian was trying to look like he belonged in a business environment. "This is nice," Mom said, looking around at the exposed brick walls and modern furniture. "Very trendy." "What do you want?" I asked, not bothering with pleasantries. Lena sat down across from my desk like we were old friends. "Maya, we've been thinking. You've done really well for yourself, and that's wonderful. But family is family, right? We think it's time you helped us out." "Helped you out? How?" Brian pulled out a folded piece of paper. "We want 1/3 of your company's value. Cash." I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. "You want what? Don't act surprised," Mom said. "You told us years ago that if you ever made it big, you'd help the family. That's a contract, Maya. A verbal contract." I tried to remember ever saying anything like that. Maybe when I was younger, maybe when I was still desperate for their approval, I might have said something about helping family, if I ever succeeded. But a contract. Even if I had said that, which I don't remember, that's not how contracts work. You can't just show up and demand 1/3 of everything I've built. "We're not demanding," Lena said sweetly. "We're asking. Nicely." "And if I say no," Brian leaned forward, "then we'll see you in court. Breach of contract, intentional infliction of emotional distress, whatever our lawyer thinks will stick." They weren't bluffing. 2 days later, I was served with legal papers. They were suing me for $15.7 million, claiming I had verbally promised to share my success with the family, and that my refusal to do so constituted breach of contract and emotional damages. I hired Gregory Martinez, one of the best attorneys in Texas. He was expensive, but Diane had recommended him, and she'd been through her own family legal drama during her divorce. "This is a garbage lawsuit," Gregory told me during our first meeting. "But garbage lawsuits can still be expensive and time-consuming. They're hoping you'll settle just to make it go away." We spent the next 2 months gathering evidence. Gregory subpoenaed my family's financial records, my college transcripts, even my old emails. What we found painted a clear picture of a family that had never invested a single dollar in my success, but now wanted to claim credit for it. We had documentation showing they'd never paid for any part of my education. We had testimonies from professors and colleagues who could speak to my work ethic and independence. We had Uncle David's records of being the only family member to support me emotionally or financially. But the most devastating piece of evidence came from Uncle David himself. He brought us a letter that Grandma Rose had written to him before she died, explaining why she'd left me the inheritance and why she'd specifically excluded my mother from her will. Maya is the only one in this family who understands the value of hard work, the letter read. She's the only one who doesn't expect handouts or feel entitled to success she didn't earn. I'm giving her this money because I know she'll use it to build something meaningful, not because she thinks she deserves it, but because she's willing to work for it. The letter went on to detail things I'd never known. My father's gambling problem that had cost them their savings twice. My mother's history of borrowing money from relatives and never paying it back. Even an incident where they'd tried to sue a cousin who'd won a small lottery prize, claiming he'd promised to share it with the family. Apparently, financial extortion was the family business. The day of the hearing, I sat in that courtroom wearing my best suit, watching my mother and sister lie under oath about their contributions to my success. Mom testified that they'd mentored me through college, helped me network, provided emotional and financial support during my startup phase. She claimed they'd given me business advice and connections that were instrumental in my success. None of it was true. Not a single word. Lena cried on the stand, talking about how close our family had always been, and how hurt she was that I'd turned my back on the people who raised me. She made it sound like I was some ungrateful daughter who'd abandoned her loving family for money. Judge Patricia Morrison had been on the bench for 25 years. She was known for her no-nonsense approach and her ability to see through legal theatrics. After listening to 2 days of testimony, she'd clearly heard enough. "I've reviewed all the evidence in this case," she said, looking directly at the plaintiff's table. "And I have to say, this is one of the most frivolous lawsuits I've encountered in recent memory." She picked up a piece of paper from her desk. "The plaintiff claims there was a verbal contract, but they've provided no evidence of consideration, no witnesses to the alleged promise, and no documentation of any kind. More importantly, family obligation is not a legal contract. Children do not owe their parents or siblings a percentage of their income simply by virtue of being related." Judge Morrison wasn't finished. "Furthermore, the court finds that the plaintiffs have a history of pursuing family members for financial gain. Evidence shows that in 2018 they attempted to sue another relative for lottery winnings under similar circumstances. That case was also dismissed." Brian's face was turning red. Lena had stopped crying and was staring at the judge in shock. Then came the bombshell. The court has also reviewed a letter written by the defendant's grandmother, Rose Thompson, which provides insight into the family dynamics at play here. Judge Morrison put on her reading glasses. Mrs. Thompson wrote, and I quote, "Maya's father has a gambling addiction that has cost this family everything twice over. Her mother enables his behavior and has a pattern of expecting others to solve their financial problems. I've watched them neglect Maya while spoiling Lena, and I will not allow them to benefit from Maya's hard work the way they've tried to benefit from others in this family." The silence in that courtroom was deafening. I watched 20 years of family secrets spill out in front of a room full of strangers. "Case dismissed," Judge Morrison said, banging her gavel. "The plaintiffs are ordered to pay all court costs and attorney fees. This court will not be used as a vehicle for family extortion." As we walked out of that courthouse, Gregory turned to me and smiled. "That's what we call a complete victory. They can't appeal this, and they can't sue you again on the same grounds." I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I just felt empty. I'd won in court, but I'd lost my family forever. Not that there was much of a family to lose. But sometimes winning means discovering that what you thought you wanted was never worth having in the first place. After winning the lawsuit, a lot of people expected me to gloat. My attorney suggested we could countersue for damages. My business partners joked about taking out a full-page ad in the San Antonio newspaper with the court's ruling. Even Uncle David said I had every right to publicly embarrass them after what they'd put me through. But here's the thing about finally being free from toxic people. You don't want to waste any more energy on them, even if that energy is revenge. Instead, I did something that probably confused the hell out of them. I quietly set up a trust fund for Lena's unborn twins. She was pregnant with her first children, and regardless of how I felt about her and Brian, those kids were innocent. The trust was structured so they'd have their college education paid for, but the money could only be used for education. No one could touch it for anything else. I didn't tell anyone about it, except my lawyer and Uncle David. It wasn't about forgiveness or trying to repair relationships. It was about breaking the cycle of pettiness that had defined my family for generations. The bigger thing I did was start the Legacy by Maya Foundation. Using some of the profits from Penny Pinch, I created a program that provides mentorship and startup grants specifically for women who are building businesses without family support. Women who, like me, had to figure it out on their own. Our first year, we helped 43 women launch everything from tech startups to bakeries to consulting firms. Each one of them reminded me of myself at 25, sitting in that laundromat at 2 in the morning, wondering if I was crazy for believing I could build something from nothing. One of our recipients, Alyssa, had been kicked out of her house at 18 for refusing to marry someone her parents had chosen for her. She used our grant to start a nonprofit helping other young women escape arranged marriages. When she sent me a photo of her first office, a tiny space above a coffee shop, I cried. Not sad tears, but proud ones. 6 months after the court case, Uncle David drove down to Austin for the weekend. We were sitting on my back porch, the same spot where we'd celebrated my housewarming party years earlier, watching the sunset over the city. "You know what I'm proudest of?" he asked, sipping the wine he'd brought from some little vineyard he'd discovered. "What's that?" "You broke the cycle, kid. All that dysfunction, all that favoritism and manipulation and financial abuse, it ends with you. Your kids, if you have them, they'll never wonder if they're good enough. They'll never have to earn love through achievement." I'd never thought about it that way, but he was right. Whatever family I built, biological or chosen, would be different. Better. I've been thinking about what Grandma Rose wrote in that letter I told him, about how some lights only shine when no one's watching. I think I finally understand what you meant all those years ago. He smiled and raised his glass. Here's to shining bright enough to light the way for others. That Thanksgiving, I hosted dinner for the first time in my life. Not for my biological family, but for my chosen one. Alyssa drove down from Dallas with her girlfriend. Diane came with her partner and their teenage daughter. Uncle David brought homemade cornbread and stories that had us laughing until our sides hurt. Marcus and Priya, my first employees who were now part owners in the company, brought their families. We had 12 people around my dining room table, and it was the most grateful I'd ever felt on Thanksgiving. As we went around the table, sharing what we were thankful for, I realized something profound. This was what family was supposed to feel like. Safe, supportive, celebratory. Nobody was keeping score. Nobody was competing for attention. Nobody was being left out. 2 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail with familiar handwriting. It was from Lena. "Maya," it read, "I know we can't undo what happened, and I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I found out about the trust fund you set up for my babies. I don't understand why you did it after everything we put you through, but I'm grateful. You're giving my children something I never had the opportunity to have, and that means more than I can express. Thank you for being bigger than the rest of us." It was the first honest thing my sister had ever said to me. I never responded to the letter, but I kept it. Not because I was ready to rebuild a relationship with her, but because it was proof that people can grow even when you don't expect them to. Today, Penny Pinch serves over 3,000 small businesses across the country. We've expanded beyond cleaning companies to restaurant salons, construction firms, you name it. Last month, we were acquired by a major financial services company for $47 million. But the number I'm proudest of isn't the sale price. It's 127, the number of women we've helped start their own businesses through the Legacy Foundation. Each one of those women is building something that's entirely hers, something that no one can take away or diminish. Every morning, I walk through the garden behind my house, with my coffee past the tomatoes and herbs I planted myself. And I think about that 10-year-old girl who couldn't understand why she wasn't enough for her parents. I wish I could go back and tell her that she was always enough, that the problem was never with her, and that someday she'd build a life so beautiful and full that their approval would become irrelevant. Some families you're born into. Some you build yourself. Both take courage, but only one guarantees that you'll be loved for who you actually are, not who someone else needs you to be. As I stand in my garden this morning, watching the sun come up over Austin, I whisper the words I never thought I'd be able to say. With complete honesty, I'm free. And I am, finally, completely beautifully free. What do you think about Maya's choice to help Lena's kids despite everything? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own freedom? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories about people who refuse to let toxic families define their worth, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.